Hello everyone.
Hey.
Welcome to Manchester Pride's first ever Human Rights Forum, which is part of the alternative Manchester Pride Festival programming. I hope you've been checking out the content so far. I want to say a huge thanks to everybody behind the scenes who managed to create this fantastic virtual schedule in the absence of in real life Pride events. I'm Reeta Loi. I am contributing editor at Gay Times, vice reporter, and also CEO of Gay Asians, which is the LGBT plus platform for the South Asian community. It's a great honour to be hosting today's conversation with three of our greatest minds, our greatest activists. We have Munroe Bergdorf, Ben Hunte, and Juno Dawson, and I'm just going to allow them to tell you a little bit about themselves. Munroe.
So I am Munroe, and I am contributing editor at Days Beauty. Where's the camera? And I work with UN Women as part of their Changemaker scheme. So I speak about the experiences of mostly Black trans women, providing visibility and authentic storytelling. I also work with L'Oreal and Mermaids as well. I'm a patron of Mermaids Charity, which is an amazing charity that helps trans kids and under 18s and their families adjust to transitions.
Amazing. Ben?
Hello, yes, my name is Ben Hunt. I'm the BBC's LGBT correspondent and presenter and journalist as well. I'm very excited to be here. I report on everything to do with gender and sexuality, mostly original stories and investigations. I'm very, very humbled that people think to contact me when things go wrong in their lives or well in their lives and want to tell the BBC all about them. So thank you for that. Always contactable via email, via social media at Ben and LDN. So yeah, share your experiences. And I have to apologize, two things. Firstly, I've been off for a month, so I'm fully like in a daze about what's going on in the world right now, but I'm still very excited to be here. But we all need a mental health break sometimes. Second thing, my puppy is snoring on the floor next to me. So apologies for any background noise you may hear. It's not like me doing random things in the background. So yes, very excited to be here.
Thanks, Ben. And Juno?
Hiya, my name is Juno Dawson. I am the best-selling trans author in the UK, which is something that I do not take lightly. I mostly write for young adults, like teenagers. My most recent novel is a retelling of Alice in Wonderland called Wonderland. I was also a columnist at Attitude magazine for a very long time, and just general girl about town. You might have spotted me and I May Destroy You on the BBC, and various other just bits of stuff. I run a cabaret club in Brighton, just keeping busy. Yeah, that's me.
Amazing. Awesome. So do you see why I'm so excited about speaking with these amazing people? And I think that, you know, we're going to explore two major themes for us as humanity and society right now, which are gender and race. And the afternoon is going to be split into two parts. And the first part, we're going to talk about trans rights are human rights. And I just want to say that this is not up for debate. The point of this coming together of these great activists and great minds is to take the conversation forward. So what we want to do is allow for there to be a level of communication and learning in a safe, gentle space that's compassionate, that you can also get involved in. So there'll be an opportunity to send in questions. There'll be Q&A after each of the two areas have been discussed. So there's a chat box in your Webinar Jam interface where you can fire in questions to us. The team will pick them up and pass them to me, and I will try and get through as many of them as I possibly can. But to start with, trans rights are human rights. Now, I want to open both themes up to everybody because we want everybody's perspectives in here. But I want to start with the policing of trans bodies. And I want to talk about how the mainstream narrative seems to be so focused on the policing of trans bodies that it feels as though we are losing sight of what the real issues and topics are. when it comes to trans people. So I want to put to you, how do we shift that narrative? In what way does it need to shift? And what do you think would be much more productive areas for us to be talking about and tackling right now? I'll take that to you, Juno, if you're happy with that.
Yeah, I think, and I remember, so I think I came out about 6 years ago, and I realised quite recently, really, that for those 6 years, I've been having the same conversations around trans rights. And that in 6 years, the conversation has moved on surprisingly little. Like people, users on social media in particular, are trying to draw me into the same arguments that they were in 2015. And so I realised I had to stop having those conversations for my mental health, because I felt like I was going crazy. Like I've said this before, I've said this a million times. And so I realised there is much more power in letting my work speak for itself. I mean, I'm certainly not going to speak on behalf of the trans community, because the trans community, A, doesn't really exist, and B, it's infinite and diverse, and there is many ways to be trans as there are trans people. So I can only speak from my experience as a relatively privileged transgender woman in the United Kingdom. So I realised it was time to stop having the conversations. Now, some of my critics will say that's me silencing debate. I think it's not. I think it's me protecting my sanity. And also, those conversations take up a lot of my time. So, I can either spend all day on Twitter banging my little symbols and saying trans women are women, trans women are women, or I can go away and write my next book, and I can say everything that it is I need to say in a creative and artistic forum. And so this year, more than the last 5 years, I've been really, really trying to just do my job, which is, a privilege, but also it's a privilege that cisgender people are always afforded. Very rarely are cisgender people asked to speak about being cisgender. So I'm just trying very hard to shut up and do my job, basically, which is I'm an author. No one is asking a bunch of cis authors to talk about what it is to be cis. So I try wherever possible to kind of just talk about my book. Which is not what today is about, but outside of events like this, I'm trying really, really hard to remember that I am an author, not necessarily an activist. I never went to activist school, ever. I'm trained to write books, not be an activist.
And I think that's a really fundamental point, because so many of us have a craft and we find ourselves in the space of activism, often quite by accident, and then get termed to be activists. But we have these other talents and skill sets that are actually the work that we do. And I think, Munroe, what would you have to say about that as well?
Well, personally, I do refer to myself as an activist, but that's something that I do. That's something that I've dedicated my time to. And I feel that marginalized people often become activists by expectation, and that's not right, because it's draining. And unless it's something that you have dedicated your time consciously to, and you want to do it, you shouldn't be made to do it. And for a long time, trans people have been made to be activists, and we definitely need to make that distinction. But for me, to push the conversation forward, I feel like Juno's completely right. We've been having the same conversation over and over and over again, and it's brain numbing. But we need to ask ourselves why. And when we look at the institutions of power, especially in the UK, they're heavily conservative. I'm going to slag off the Beeb now, but but the BBC has a lot of work to do. I would go as far as to say that the BBC is institutionally has a lot of issues with racism and transphobia. Obviously, they're doing great work Ben's doing great work, but I think that we've got a long way to go, especially within industries of influence such as the media and television. And, it can't just be down to the arts. I see television and the arts as separate. If you're looking at a corporate level, who are the people that are commissioning shows? We saw I May Destroy You, which is an incredible example of a Black woman taking control, and that's the product that you get is a product of diverse quality. But that's very much a rarity. If we look at television as a whole, it's heavily swung in the favor of cisgender, white, straight men, mainly, because they're the ones making the decisions. So in order to change the narrative and truly change it, we need to be focusing on the reality of what trans people face. And that isn't the debate of, you know, what toilets we should be using. It's how do we get trans people into the jobs that we deserve, that we're capable of fulfilling? How do we increase the unemployment rates? How do we make the world safe for trans people? How do we improve trans people's mental health? We're not having any of these conversations. We're just having very redundant talking points, really based in fear, and I would say as a way to either draw people in for viewership or to sell papers.
Okay, so in terms of looking at those solutions, Ben, as somebody that does the work that you do within the BBC, how do you feel from a journalistic point of view this work can happen, or these shifts can happen?
Yeah, I mean, the BBC is in a very interesting place, considering the amount of stuff that's happening online, social media, in real life, because the BBC is impartial. The BBC is supposed to be an impartial organisation. That is our editorial guideline. I'm not here to sit and defend the BBC, but I would hope that by the basis of my work, I can kind of show where I think that editorially we should be sitting, which is platforming people's experiences, which for me is the main thing. I mean, that's why I became a journalist, was showing aspects of people's lives which the mainstream media don't usually cover. So before being LGBT correspondent, I was a presenter for BBC Africa, and within BBC Africa, I was going out to the continent and showing positive Black stories, which we just didn't hear and we didn't see. So I would hope that in my, 3 and a bit years since leaving my job at Google to become a journalist, I kind of have this roster of stories where I can say, yeah, I'm really proud of what I've shown of that and what I've done with that. And I suppose with the LGBT perspective and in terms of news, I think I've done exactly the same. And like I said, not here to defend it, but I do try to move the conversation on past the anger and aggression, because if you think about it, there really are, I can't even say sides. There are two areas of conversation happening right now, and there isn't really communication within either one. So they're shouting on both sides for sure, but you could very easily switch off and not be present in those other conversations if you're on one side of this. And generationally, I think that's where you're seeing this be such a complex thing. As a side hustle, I started up a confidence academy for young people. So I go around the country once a week, pre-COVID, and I'd speak to young people about having more confidence and being themselves. And I go to single school every single week for 6 to 9 year olds, 6 to 9 year olds, 10 to 12 year olds, and 13 to 18 year olds. And in my hour session, we'll be talking about their lives and their experiences and what they can do to make their impact on the world. Now, in some of the schools I've gone to, not a single child within the groups would identify as straight. They would all be either pansexual or bisexual. In other classes that I'd go to, many were questioning their gender identity and who they actually were. I think what you're really seeing is these two sides of a generational debate. And we're on one side of it. And I think that with the BBC especially, you're seeing that some people are just kind of having conversations with themselves. And what I'm really hoping that I can do with this role is to start having those conversations kind of like across those generational boundaries, because I think there's just a lot of misunderstanding. The average person does not understand the Equality Act. The average person does not understand the Gender Recognition Act. So when you position it as with certain media positioning these things as certain things, it's going to lead to people feeling scared or frustrated or upset, when actually that doesn't need to be a thing. So I think my role is to hold power to account, stand up to people, and make sure they're explaining things properly to the nation.
Okay, brilliant. I think really interesting perspectives there. Did any of you want to add anything else to that before I move on to the next topic?
Yeah, I just wanted to just pick up on what Ben said about shouting on both sides. I think that there's only shouting on one side. I think that the shouting on behalf of trans people is in defense of our human rights and lives. And we are essentially being shouted at by people who, as Ben said, don't understand. So I wouldn't say that, you know, it's wildly unequal. You know, trans people make up, what, 1.5% of the general population, and we're being shouted at by the vast majority of cisgender people.
By the Times as well. I mean,
yeah, it's not a fair fight by any stretch of the imagination. So to say that, you know, we're not listening to people's concerns isn't the truth, and it isn't necessarily fair. It's like saying that Black people and white people are shouting, and, you know, that Black people make up 3% of the UK population. So we're shouting in defense of our lives. That's Black Lives Matter is a statement. Trans rights, human rights is a statement. So any noise that we're making is in defense of our humanity, and any noise that people are making in reaction to that is essentially oppression. So we need people to it can't be on trans people to educate cis people all the time. There needs to come a point where the cisgender community needs to take stock and realize that there's an issue here. Just like the white community needs to understand that there's an issue here with racism, the cisgender community needs to understand that there's a problem with transphobia, and there's a problem with how they view gender. It's not how we view gender. Obviously, if trans people are going out and being violent and whatnot, that's crossing boundaries, but that's not the case. We're the ones being attacked. We're the ones being constantly harassed. We're the ones having to deal with a heavily biased transphobic press. We're the ones having to deal with programs like Newsnight, which is heavily biased towards people who oppose trans rights. So, you know, I don't think it's fair to say that the BBC is impartial. The BBC is not impartial. If anything, the BBC has a lot of transphobia in its programming and commissioning. So we definitely need to understand and address that transphobia isn't just individual acts or with trans exclusion or radical feminism. It's institutionalized, and the BBC is a case study for that.
I think a lot of media outlets have fundamentally misunderstood the notion of balance. And I think this is stretching back to this sort of very gladiatorial style of TV, which rose up through Jerry Springer and Jeremy Kyle, and has really infiltrated news in a way it shouldn't have. News became increasingly Fox-like, dare I say it. And there's even rumours this weekend that they want to start like a Fox News style channel in the UK, which I think would be the absolute worst thing for this country. I think it's about power. I think, you know, every once in a blue moon, a trans person like myself or Munroe or Paris Lees will be given the opportunity to speak, but we are not the ones calling the shots. We are never the editors or the commissioners. There are no trans politicians in the United Kingdom. So we can sometimes be used as props, and we are often wheeled out. But there is no, for example, in the UK, we don't have a Janet Mock. We don't have somebody who is the equivalent, where Janet Mock now is setting a narrative at Netflix. But we don't have someone like that in the United Kingdom as yet. And, you know, I'm very lucky in that I am at some of these tables and I am working on projects with commissioners, but I'm still not the commissioner. I'm still, at any point, I could be dropped from these projects. And I speak as possibly one of the most powerful trans women in this country, and I still don't have any real decision-making power. And that's perhaps how we get to the next step. But I don't even see anybody on the menu, you know, on the horizon. I can't think of a trans person who's anywhere near to a position of power. And possibly you're looking at two of us. It's Munroe and I. There are very few trans people who are in our position.
Yeah. So what does trans allyship look like? And I'm talking inside the LGBT plus community with the issues we have with TERFs to begin with, but also outside of the LGBT community. What does trans allyship look like to you? What would it feel like?
I think that allyship is best carried out with using what you're good at. And if you're good at art, if you're good at crunching numbers, if you're good at public speaking, if you're good at protesting, you're good at organizing, I think it's taking what you're good at and applying it to a community that doesn't have the same privileges as you. And that is so vast and wide, but I think it needs to be in action. It can't just be in words, and it needs to be consistent. It's an open-ended promise. It's not something that you pick up and then put down. It needs to be a consistent personality adjustment. And when I say personality adjustment, I mean you need to go out and seek the information yourself rather than leaning on a marginalized community to educate you. You need to be the one going out and educating those around you. It's almost like a positive pyramid scheme, I feel, where you educate somebody and then they educate somebody and then they educate somebody, and then it just hopefully changes things that way. But I don't think activism necessarily takes one shape or form.
Okay, so essentially, in a very practical sense, what you're saying is the skill sets that we have as individuals, in whatever way they may be, in our work or in our personal lives, seeking out trans organizations like Mermaids, for example, and offering support and help and offering those skill sets.
Yeah, I think so. I think, it depends. Like if you've got a big platform, then educate your followers and signal post. I think amplifying the voices of community members is one of the most positive things that you can do instead of, regurgitating what we say. I think it's best to use your platform, got a platform, and offer it up to trans people to speak. Or I did something with Victoria Beckham at Pride, which is she basically gave us her Instagram profile just to take it over and do an Instagram live, which gave us the opportunities to speak about our own experiences. And it had nothing to do with her, but it was utilizing her privilege and her platform, her audience, to educate people that we wouldn't necessarily come into contact with. So I think that there's, you just need to be a little bit innovative yourself and just think about, what do I have access to? How can I use that to help a community that doesn't have what I have?
Okay, brilliant. I think that's really good advice. And I think that, I want to move it on to the area of us looking at cancel culture now. And I want to know how you feel about it, and specifically how it affects conversations for trans people and conversations around trans rights.
Who wants to? Is that to anyone? Who is that to? Is that?
That's to anyone that wants to talk.
I'm not sure about this whole cancel culture thing. I'm yet to really sort of see it in action. I'm not sure how much I buy into it. I think a lot of people cry about cancel culture when actually they've just been criticised. And I think, with the exception of, some notable people who might have lost work contracts for expressing wildly prejudiced views, I can't really see any sort of, tangible proof that people are being cancelled. I mean, Graham Linehan is still working, kind of J.K. Rowling is still going to be making those films. Where these people who are being cancelled, I'm not really seeing it. I mean, I think criticism, you know, freedom of speech is not freedom of consequence. And, you know, those people were given ample opportunity to speak, and they did. And they have faced consequences for some of their opinions, you know, and that's true of all of us. You know, if I was to go mad and use this opportunity to start being vile, I would expect Stonewall to drop me really, really quickly. That's kind of, I would fully expect that. And it feels that particularly, you know, in this first thread where we're dealing with transphobia, it seems that a lot of media outlets in this country have a real blind spot when it comes to transphobia, you know, and, you know, if to name but one transphobic journalist. Actually, I'm not going to name names because there's so many of them. So that seems but you know, The Guardian has allowed many journalists to express some really, really transphobic views, and actually they haven't really faced any consequences. So I'm just not really, I'm just not seeing it, if I'm honest.
Mm-hmm. I think it really depends on how you define cancel culture. I think a lot of people have got a lot of different definitions of cancel culture. I'm anti, I'm pro accountability. And I think that when we call people out or recognize patterns in people's behavior, I don't see that as canceling. I'm anti harassment. And I think that when you know, we're cancelling somebody and it's going way over the line of holding somebody accountable, and it's now going into commenting on people's physical appearance, or say, you know, Katie Hopkins is an awful person, but then commenting on her physical appearance and saying that, and comparing her to, say, J-Lo, and that they're the same age. And I think that that's what I have an issue with, is when it turns into a public hanging, or, you know, we've got this person now in the stocks, let's really whittle them down to the point where that impacts on their humanity. And like, what do we want? Do we want people to kill themselves? Do we want people to, you know, have a symbolic death? Like, I think that is tapping into a dark side of society, because ultimately we want people to be held accountable. We do. We want, you know, people that commit sexual crimes to go to prison. We want, you know, homophobic and racist people to be held accountable for their actions and the harm that they cause. But do we want people to feel so unsafe that they hurt themselves or other people around them? No. But you know, we've seen that it can go that way, that constant harassment on social media can lead people to take their own lives. And I don't think that that's the way that we change things. I think that we need to really have a conversation with each other about how we hold each other accountable. And if people refuse to change, if people refuse to acknowledge that their behavior is harmful, then yeah, I think that, I mean, if cancelling means putting somebody, you know, bearing in mind that that person's toxic, then cancel them. But cancelling doesn't stop someone from existing. We don't send them off to like a faraway island. It's not a thing. So I think that if you hold people accountable, but then if you're just saying, oh, that person's an awful person, so I'm now going to go and harass that person, then I don't think that's helpful.
I think sometimes as well that these conversations can become straw men for what we should be talking about. So I noticed very quickly we stopped talking about certain people's transphobia and we started talking about cancel culture, which kind of moved the conversation off what we were talking about in the first place, which was somebody's prejudiced views. And I think you see that a lot with, oh, it's PC gone mad, oh, it's snowflake culture, or what do we think about cancel culture? And I think sometimes these things deflect from what we should be really talking about as well.
And also oh, sorry, Ben.
No, go for it.
I think that the conversation around cancel culture. I've spoken out about cancel culture before, you know, people like Donald Trump and J.K. Rowling started talking about, you know, what about cancel culture? Because I think that there's a lot of privileged people in positions of power that haven't, until very recently, been held accountable. They're from a generation where there was no accountability, and freedom of speech included hate speech, essentially. And now with the focus on human rights, and the younger generations especially heavily focused on human rights, and the dawn of social media, we can now hold governmental bodies to account in a way that we could never before. So I think that it's also like a bit, it's a bit sus that, you know, people on the right, namely the Conservatives, have been cancelling people for decades. You know, they've been harassing people in the media for as far back as I can remember. You know, we've seen shaming articles after shaming articles. You know, newspapers like the News of the World went bust and stopped because of cancel culture. You know, it's just about how you frame it. So I think that if we're going to have a conversation about how the left hold the right accountable, we need to look at how the right have been oppressing the left for centuries.
Ben, what are your thoughts on this?
I would just hope that in all of this talk around cancel culture, I'd hope that people don't get scared enough that they can't ask questions. Because if I'm looking at my newsroom and I'm looking at when I started this role, I had producers who didn't necessarily understand certain aspects of LGBT lives. So having to break that down to someone and explain it and see in their face like, oh, so that's what cisgender means. Or, oh, so that's what the GRA is. And of course, it's on people to educate themselves, and Google is literally your friend. It's right there for you. But I think in some of these circumstances, people are too scared to hold certain conversations for fear of being dragged. So I suppose my hope is that we don't shut down conversations, we do open conversations, and we do allow people to kind of share in our wealth of knowledge that we do have. Yeah, but cancel culture does scare me. It really does scare me. And I think it's, especially being a journalist in these times, working for what is an impartial organization by editorial standards, it's very hard, because if you look at the way that journalism is kind of sitting at the moment, a lot of journalists are activists. You can literally scroll down someone's Twitter feed and you will see exactly where they stand and believe on certain issues. So it doesn't lead to impartial conversations. It doesn't lead to all of that. You can literally see someone's opinion. So whereas on air, there may be one thing, on social media, there may be something else. So I really hope that this does kind of start a conversation around where we sit in all of this. And I suppose the other thing to flag as well is that the BBC is a public service broadcaster, and if you're paying your TV license, then please share your views. I mean, there's literally channels where you can share your views on what you want the BBC's commissioning to look like, what you want programs and output to look like. And I think it is worth speaking to editors, asking editors their views on certain things. What do they think about this? Why can't they invite this guest on? It's literally your broadcaster, so get involved.
I think the what's coming across from all of you is fundamentally the same thing, which is, you know, which I would echo as well, is that the spaces that we have to speak and build solidarity and community and alliances are massively lacking, because the systems that we have for communication, i.e. social media, often are created with divisiveness and oppositional systems in mind, right? So how do we find points of connection through which we can actually learn and share and grow together when everything is pitted in opposition and that's encouraged? And that's what's coming through a lot from all of you. It's certainly been my experience as well. And whilst we're looking at that as a theme in terms of solidarity, I guess the question that we'd been considering was more around trans solidarity. And Juno, you said earlier that you're not really a community, you know. So the question was really around how can we develop more solidarity across the trans community? What does that even look like? Does it exist? It sounds like saying it doesn't. You know, on a global scale, we're looking at different backgrounds, cultures, ethnicities, faiths, experiences and journeys. With so much disparity, again, you know, how do we build those points of connections and forums for people to actually connect and support each other? I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I mean, it's sad, and there are so few of us. You know, we're such a small group. The way we've been discussed in the media, you would think there were an awful lot of us, but we're really, really not. And you know, I live near Brighton, and even in Brighton, you know, I can think of there's like one pub where like a bunch of trans people might hang out, but that is not like a formally organised thing. We have Trans Pride, and the first Trans Pride in the country rose out of that pub. It was literally like a bunch of trans people hanging out at the Marlborough, decided to do a march about 5 years ago, and that's where it stemmed from. But it's really tough, and money is an issue. I mean, a lot of trans people live in poverty. So how can you organise when you are feeling so oppressed culturally and societally? How are we meant to organise and come together? You know, and I can't think that there's not really structures in place. Like we all know the historical role of the gay bar or the gay club. There aren't really trans bars and trans clubs. So we don't even really have the geographical locations. But, you know, I have been, and I always say that people do see, you know, if you had your time over, if you could do something different, you know, in 2013, I would have tracked down a lot more trans women. You know, because actually I get such solidarity and such sisterhood, I guess is the only word I can think from other trans women, because we've had some shared experiences, wildly different experiences as well. But, you know, but I had to kind of make those connections for myself. There wasn't really a formalized way of finding out other trans people. And I'm very, very lucky that my career in the media opened doors and opened pathways to meeting women like Munroe and sort of being able to sort of say, my God, this is weird. Like, this whole thing is a trip. You know, this is mad, kind of. But that's, you know, I feel very fortunate in that. But I wish I could have some better advice for how it is that trans and non-binary people could organise ourselves, I guess, through things like Manchester Pride, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, my experience as an Indian person is that we have over 300 words for gender expression in Indian languages. We have a third gender that you can identify as on your passport. We've had this stuff for time. The fluidity of gender has been part of our mythology for thousands of years. It's very ingrained in our culture, to the point when I came out to my mum, the first thing she thought I was telling her was that I wanted to transition. And it was much harder for her to actually understand my identity as a lesbian, right? So, you know, now we're in this space where we're actually able to explore gender and sexuality very separately from each other. It was, you know, for me, it was like, oh, I'm a dyke, you know, when I'm younger, I didn't understand, even with my cultural understanding of gender, through the Western lens that I'd grown up in, I couldn't quantify the separation between my gender and my sexuality. And I think when we start to look at those sorts of intersections, break those down, we can see why we start to feel more and more fragmented. And I did just want to ask you, Munroe, about intersectionality in terms of feminism, and what your thoughts are on that, and what your experience is of that, I guess.
Well, bringing it back to community, I see community as a mindset. I don't necessarily see community as physical, because so many of us as trans people have either been or are isolated in our transness. It's something, you know, there's not, as Juno said, a lot of us. So, you know, we've had to go out and make those connections, and that largely is online, and has been online for many trans people, including myself. So when I think about community, I think about who else rejects what I reject. And I reject transphobia, I reject white supremacy, I reject racism, I reject homophobia, all of the marginalizations that are associated with my identity. So intersectionality means that, you know, I can't separate my transness from my blackness, from my queerness, because I'm all of those things and they've all impacted on each other. But when we're talking about intersectionality within feminism, we need to make sure that feminism serves as a tool of liberation that includes all identities, sexuality, gender expressions. Whoever you are as a person, feminism should be there for you, regardless of whether or not you're man, woman, non-binary. And feminism for a long time hasn't been inclusive. Black trans women didn't get the vote when white women got the vote. So, and the suffragettes, you know, didn't fight for Black women when they were fighting for white women. So our histories aren't linked, and so liberation hasn't always been linked with all women and everybody else who identifies however they identify. So yeah, for me, intersectionality is everything. It's nuance, it's understanding that we are individuals, but again, it brings it back to community. It's about understanding that we're all very, very different, but we've all, you know, we all want the same thing. We all want a life where we can be who we are, but in order to be who we are, we need a tool of liberation that serves for everyone, and that's intersectional feminism. So anyone that doesn't know what intersectional feminism is, intersectionality is a word that was coined by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, and it was born out of the realization that in America, I think it was in the 1980s or 1970s, there were some Black women that worked at General Motors, and General Motors was going to lay off all of their workers that joined after a certain date. But all of those women were Black women, but they didn't hire any Black employees before that date. So those women then said, wait a minute, we're being discriminated on the basis of being Black women. And then they realized that legally you couldn't discriminate against somebody for being a Black woman. You could only discriminate against someone for being Black or a woman. So she really realized a loophole there and called it intersectionality. And it's about the nuance of who we are that we can be discriminated on. So yeah, it's an amazing word, and definitely look it up because I really condensed that whole situation. It's a very complicated law case, legal case.
Thanks for that, Munroe. I think you articulated it very well.
I've been up since 6 a.m.
Yeah, you're doing brilliantly. So I just wanted to move on to Ben to sort of gain your perspective on this before we move over to some audience questions.
I'm just gonna wake my puppy up real quick because wait, listen to this. She's like in the background, so I'm like, let me just reach over quickly. Yeah, my perspective. I think there's something around community, and I'm in a very weird position in that I can kind of look in and see what people are kind of thinking and feeling within this community because they literally tell me. So it's kind of like a sense check of like what's actually happening. One of the weirdest things a year into this role that I'm kind of seeing on a daily basis is how people disagree on things which then other people don't understand. So from an outside perspective, we're seen as this one homogenous LGBT bubble, this one group of people who all agree on everything, march together, waving the same flags, and we're all like singing from the same hymn sheet. The reality is that underneath this one bubble of communities, there's lots of different sections. I mean, there's lots of different intersections, for instance. And I suppose that you're not seeing these nuances displayed publicly. And I think that is leading to some misunderstandings as well. So, for instance, if you look at X passports, this idea that for gender non-conforming people, they want an option on their passports, which is an X, already in lots of different countries around the world, and it's causing a lot of drama in the UK to try and get this implemented. One of the people that's leading on this campaigns for X passports is a gender non-conforming person, but they don't believe that non-binary identity exists. So this is a person that you would think is LGBT, is within our bubble and part of this community, but doesn't believe that certain members of the community are actually saying the right thing. So I think that one of the things that really needs to happen is that we kind of need more conversations between these intersections, more opportunities like this to actually discuss, like, what's on your mind? Like, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? And I think that is part of being a community and is a necessary part of the community. And what else was I going to say? I was going to talk. I'm gonna park it there for now on that issue, I think. Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, all of you. We're going to move on to some questions. I'm loving this. It's so passionate. This is, I love it.
As well.
The first question we have for you is what do you feel are the major barriers to true equality for trans people, and what can we all do to best support the fight for trans rights? If I can come to you, Juno, on that one.
For me, I think increasingly I want to talk about, I think what it is that we need as trans people in the UK in 2020, and I think we need better access to healthcare. I think whether you think I'm a woman or not, I don't think I should have to wait 3.5 years to see a specialist doctor. I think we need a cheaper and easier way to be able to register ourselves trans or non-binary. I think we need recognition for non-binary people legally as well. And just legal protection from harassment, I think, as well. We need to have better relationships with those people who should be protecting us and looking out for us. But particularly that first one, for those trans people who want access to healthcare, I don't think they should have to wait for as long as we're currently waiting. And I think it's a crisis.
Mm-hmm.
I'll move on to the next question to all of you, which is, what's the biggest challenge for trans people to overcome? Indifference or prejudice?
I would say, that's a really good question. I think that obviously both of them are an issue, but I think that indifference, if more people cared, and if more people spoke up, if more people raised their voices in defense of us, then it would take some of the burden off of our shoulders as marginalized people. I think, I think prejudice, obviously, but, prejudice is always going to be there, but hopefully people not saying anything isn't always going to be a thing. So a realistic answer is people not saying anything, because I'm not naive enough to think that prejudice is going to disappear overnight.
But it's also about where people are saying things. So, for instance, I know for a fact that my mum sides with the LGBT community. She sides with LGBT people, but she does not use Twitter. She's not actively retweeting and quote tweeting Piers Morgan and whoever else. So you're not actively seeing that voice in certain spaces. And I really do think that social media, these social media companies, I was literally working for Google, they have been set up to generate conversation and to generate feeling. So it's an echo chamber, sometimes not necessarily in a positive way, where actually you're being displayed things that are going to make you more angry and make you want to interact with them. So one of my biggest fears for just LGBT young people in general is that they think that what these social media companies are displaying them maybe in their timelines is actually what happens when they're walking outside in the street. So when I'm going around to these schools and I'm speaking to young people and they're saying like, oh, I'm really scared to kind of be myself outside the house and blah, blah, blah. In some of these areas, like yes, of course there's fear. We're all scared. I'm scared on a daily basis for myself. But what you're seeing displayed to you is not necessarily what everyone is saying outside. I don't think that indifference is necessarily always displayed to you. I think it was Pink News that did a survey the other day that did show that X amount of people were actually in support of trans women rather than rather than what we were seeing on social media. And it's that element that you're not being shown. The people that may be supportive but actually aren't activists, they're not willing to kind of put themselves forward and fight. And not everyone's an activist. Visibility.
But that's the issue. That's the issue. That what I think is the issue is that people not willing to. So it's that standing by and being a spectator to things that are happening. That when I say speaking up, I don't mean tweeting. If tweeting's not going to be, effective, if you don't have anyone to tweet to, I think that if you've got a big platform, then speaking up is a really big thing because it's showing where you stand and it's hopefully influencing the people that follow you. But when I say speaking up, I mean doing things like active things like writing to your MPs or, lending your voice to petitions or speaking up in defense of situations that are happening by, working with charities. There's so many different things that you can do to speak up, and it's not necessarily always using your physical voice or your audible voice.
Right.
It's about
voting as well. I mean, there's no good clapping for carers and then voting for
exactly. It's not doing anything. So when I say speaking up, I mean people doing something. People don't necessarily care, or if they're indifferent, then being indifferent to racism. I don't care if you're indifferent to racism. I want you to do something. I want you to, stand up with us. If you can protest, then protest. If you can raise your voice to your MPs about concern of situations happening, then do that. If you want to work with disenfranchised Black youth, do that. There's an infinite amount of things that you can do, but being indifferent but well-meaning, I've got no time for that.
So following on from that, we've got two amazing questions in. One is, how can we as a community put pressure on the government to improve provision of trans healthcare?
Well, good luck with this.
Well, I've got a very juicy report that should be out hopefully next month, hopefully by the end of September, around trans healthcare. And yeah, it's a problem. It's a problem. I think especially when you're looking at the funding that's involved in trans healthcare, the idea that so many people need to go down private means rather than waiting on ridiculously long waiting lists in order to seek initial help. I think one thing that I'm very conscious of is of the young people who are starting at the beginning of their journey, the beginning of their gender identity and understanding who they are. It's very easy to change your Instagram bio, but it's very difficult to actually start that process, that medical process. And I think there's a real disconnect at the moment between actually helping people. My reporting over the next few months is definitely going to be focusing on that and looking at those discrepancies and what actually needs to be done around the UK to make sure that people are being supported by this NHS system that they're paying into.
There are some trials at the moment. I know within London, they've kind of wound down the previous system, which was at the Tavistock clinics, and they are trialling a new sort of Healthcare England-based approach that will hopefully... So at the moment, there are only a very few gender identity clinics in the UK. I have to drag myself to Northampton twice a year, which is insane. I live in Brighton. There isn't a clinic. There isn't a trans clinic in Brighton. It's things like that. So it's about kind of trying to roll out a slightly new system that would mean, for example, that perhaps GPs would be able to initiate some treatments. At the moment, my GP isn't really responsible for my care. So I think these are big organizational things, but there has to be a will within those organizations. And my fear is I don't see government putting any particular pressure on the NHS to change the existing systems. But I know that Stonewall are just one group who are working with the NHS to try make the system fairer and easier and more accessible.
I mean, there are a lot of good organizations working. They're working hard. They're pushing, but it's about there being a willingness to change. And I suppose that's what you're going to see over, hopefully, within the next couple of weeks when the government's consultation results may be announced. Maybe. I mean, we're, what, 2 years late? But they may be announced within the next couple of weeks when Parliament comes back on the 1st of September. So that's the initial step, I guess, towards these changes that were expected to be made under Penny Mordaunt, in 2018. So maybe positive changes around the corner. Maybe.
Well,
I think we need to think about how this government talks about trans people and our experiences. And there's, how much of a spike was there in transphobic attacks in the last year? 80-something. When the government aren't talking about that, we're not talking about trans people's well-being and encouraging trans people to be themselves. And it's very much, the narrative is almost of a burden. We're not getting how can we embrace trans people. It's it's from a place of concern. There's no celebration of being trans, because it's I'm a big critic of this government. I don't hold any faith in them. I think that they've sat on this report for way too long, and
there's a reason they've sat on it for way too long.
Yeah, actively encouraged harm to our community. So I don't think that we necessarily should be looking to this government for anything. I don't think that it's going to happen. I hope it does, but I don't think it will. So I think that really my work personally, and I think that we should be encouraging each other to, heal from within our community and look like what we can do to support each other. How can we support people that are vulnerable, and really get this sense of community that we hope would be there. And I think
so we have one more question. I'm just conscious of time, so I'm just going to try and squeeze in this question that is also related to healthcare, which I'm sure you can all weigh in on. And it's, how can individual doctors support trans and non-binary patients best?
Speak to them.
Educate themselves. Don't wait until a trans person ends up in your room. Like when I turned up to my GP, he had to Google in front of me of what to do with me. I knew more of what to do than he did. So I think it's, don't wait for a trans person to turn up. Be ready.
And I would second what Munroe just said. I mean, I got freakishly lucky. But again, this is where community can be intersectional. So I lucked out. My GP in London was a super well-connected gay man who met many trans women before. And it was just a sheer fluke that I walked into his office one day in 2014 and he said, "Oh, I read your column in Attitude." And I was like, "I see you." And that was, I mean, how lucky is that? But it shouldn't be about luck. It shouldn't be a postcode lottery. Every single GP, and we know we've seen referrals rise sort of steadily year on year as education got better and people are more clued up about trans lives. Of course, referral rates have gone up, but that means, again, the responsibility shouldn't be on us. The responsibility should be on the GPs, because we are a part of your job. So.
Brilliant, thank you. So we're going to wrap up this first half of our conversation. Thank you so much. I think the questions just tell us alone that people have been really engaged with everything you've been saying. The second, so we're going to have a 5-minute break now, and there's some kind of activity going to be happening, which we're about to find out about. And then we'll be back with the massive theme of the role of pride in race equality. And we'll be picking up the conversation with you then. And again, an opportunity to ask questions. Hello, can we all hear each other?
Yeah.
Whoa.
Hi.
Hello. Okay, so welcome back, everybody. So we are going to pick up the conversation now with another crucially fundamental theme, which is race. And race is the biggest system that we need to tackle and untopple more broadly in society. But when we're looking at how that becomes very amplified within the LGBT plus space, we know that there are increased levels of racism within our own community and queer spaces. So we're going to try and tackle some of the themes and questions around this that we've been putting together. And the topic is the role of pride in race equality specifically. Obviously, we're going to talk more broadly around that as well. I think with the foundational role of Black trans people and Black trans women in the very movement that is at the core of our community, it's alarming that as pride organisations, we found ourselves fundamentally where we are, where we even have to ask the question, what can pride organisations do to better support communities of colour? And I'm going to put that to you as that question.
Can I jump in on this one?
Please do.
It was this time last year at Manchester Pride that I did an investigation into racism that was happening on the ground by security officers, by bar staff, all kinds of people that were ignoring myself, ignoring other Black LGBT people who were attending the various different events. Now, one thing that was incredible from my understanding was the way that when that piece went out, yes, there was some shock within Manchester. People were like, oh my goodness, like the city is not racist in the slightest. Like, there's no racism here. But there was a real want to actually develop an understanding of what happened and to create some kind of change. And from my understanding, there were elements that did change, and it's a shame, obviously, that COVID's happened, so we're not actually seeing those changes put in place. But there was a push for bar staff to be more understanding and more educated around race. And I mean, I don't know how much more aware you can be of Black people waiting in a queue, but they were going to be more aware of Black people waiting in a queue to be served. There was going to be more understanding of security staff to not specifically target or pick on people of color who are holding bags, because believe it or not, but not all people of color are terrorists. So there was a real understanding that Manchester Pride wanted to do more to push and push people's understanding of race. Now, I think within the community wider than that, I would just challenge people to look at who people are following within the community and understand their views on race from that. So I know that there are some really powerful people within the LGBT community who don't follow a single Black person, for instance, or don't follow a single Asian person. So I think there's a lot of talk around race at the moment, and a lot more action that people could be taking to diversify their thought and understanding, that maybe is happening a lot more outside of the LGBT community that isn't really happening inside it.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think that when we look at things like Pride, it's almost like a micro version of what's actually happening. So we can encourage bar staff to be, more racially aware, to serve, customers in an equal way. But it's almost like, that's just a symptom. The problem is the reason why they do that. So it's deeper than, people's actions, it's their mindset. So I think, you know, it's almost like we need to change society. It's not, you know, going into like organizations necessarily. That's like one thing that we can do, but the issue really lies within society, and we need to change people's minds and understand the way that people's minds function has been heavily impacted by white supremacy. Like what you said earlier about Indian culture having so much more of an expansive understanding of gender. But in this country, we're seeing, you know, we're going back to gender because it applies, but it's, you know, people like saying that there's only two genders, but, you know, that's the white understanding. That's like the European, Caucasian understanding, Western understanding of gender. But you move through the world and that's not the case. So I think that people don't necessarily understand the origins of their thinking. And, you know, you can make people aware of, you know, one aspect, or you need to serve somebody quickly, you need to like do this within your job. But what about when they go home? And what about, you know, how they raise their kids? What about, you know, how they vote? What about all of like these really deep things within society that are bigger than pride? Even though that's a really big thing, we need to look at people as individuals and to where is this racism coming from and how is it not being addressed? Because, you know, I don't think that going into a workplace and making that workplace more racially inclusive doesn't mean that those people that work in that workplace are now going to be more racially, you know, sensitive in general.
I mean, do you feel that, is there something that we can be doing in terms of joint activism? Because I feel like we're at a time right now where there's such an opportunity to create alliances amongst all of us that are from marginalized groups or fall into different intersections, right? This is the opportunity that I feel is presenting itself. So I founded an organization called Gaysians 4 years ago as an umbrella brand for about 30 organizations now that span different South Asian faiths, charities up and down the country that do work that is mental health, sexual health, supporting trans people, supporting a Muslim group that might be in Bradford, a Sikh group that might be in Leicester, etc. Meetups and organisations all over the UK that haven't had, they've been massively underfunded and they've been really hard to find. And I spent many years trying to find support and find people like me. And when I started I built a website and I put these organisations on there. And fundamentally, we're an alliance, but that the organisations, because of differing beliefs and faiths, etc., or even where they sit in terms of where they are in the LGBT plus space, we're not necessarily operating as broader communities. It was fractious. And we're still in the process of building those bridges, but fundamentally we've started to work together much more collectively and participating in Pride marches, working with UK Black Pride, etc., to build broader alliances. And that it feels like that family is really growing. So I know it's possible because we've seen it. And I'm not saying it's been easy and I'm not saying it hasn't been without struggle, but I find myself feeling like, what does that joint activism look like if we start to spread our wings into much broader community spaces where all four of us here are connecting on a point of being part of LGBT+, but at the same time, we all carry different differences and intersections. How do we take that into a broader space? What are your thoughts on that?
I think surely it's about communication. It has to be about communication, and I think that is one of the basis of community, right? Is that people talk and actively share their thoughts and opinions and beliefs. I think that race is such a big topic, and if there's one thing I've noticed being the Black LGBT correspondent for the BBC, is that when I sometimes turn up to these events, I am shocked at the fact that clearly people don't see race, because I'm the only Black person in the room that you've invited to these things. And it genuinely surprises me. I mean, there's been theatre events, there's been workshops, there've been all kind of things. So I've walked in, it's been like, wow, here we are. And I'm sure that as a result of Black Lives Matter, maybe things have changed. But my goodness, before all of this, I mean, working in an LGBT space, and I'm sure you're aware, Rita, it's like, you do see a lot of white folk. You do. So I would hope that this has triggered some conversations, and we are starting to communicate a bit better to understand that even if it needs to be forced for now, just to kind of generate some kind of change, like, things have to start moving in a better direction to actually represent an LGBT community that is more than just white gay men.
I think, like, to build on what Munroe said, I think prides, wherever you are, whether you are in Brighton or London or one of the smaller regional ones, I think prides are a microcosm of the country at large. And like a lot of things in this country, the system has been designed to benefit white people first. And it has been designed with white people in mind. What do white people like? What do white people buy? And I think as prides have become increasingly capitalist, that there's been a much bigger emphasis on selling tickets to things. So what will white people buy tickets to? Kylie, it's Britney, it's all your usuals. And again, those things are, like Ben said, I think aimed at white gay men first, and if anybody else wants to come along, that's great as well. And so it really is, it's about changing the system. And hopefully if we change the little system that is pride, that is one step towards changing the big thing, which is society. And that is the work of all people, which is to dismantle white supremacy. And, it was white people who put that supremacy there. So I think the dismantling has to start with white people. And about as, it's frustrating how many white people still now, after everything we've seen this year, are still reluctant to acknowledge that white supremacy exists. Part of this problem, which has been said many times this year, which is it comes down to schools and education and the way we've taught racism. And I know, because I used to be a primary school teacher back in a former life, that, we did, and I was guilty of this. We used to teach, I taught 5-year-olds. I used to teach 5-year-olds that, to be racist was to call people bad names, and you must never use these words, and you must treat everybody the same, and you must treat people fairly. But actually what I should have been saying to those kids, which is, welcome to your life, which is rich with white supremacy. And basically we're all living in this house that white supremacy has built. And I mean, that would have maybe been a bit full on for 5-year-olds, but I'm sure there would have been a way that I could have done that in an appropriate way. And I think we are going to have to go back into schools, and we are going to have some of those difficult conversations. And yeah, maybe for white people they are difficult conversations, but it's a lot less difficult than being shot by a policeman. So I think we need to have them.
Yeah, exactly. I think that, we can talk about allyship within marginalized communities as well, but I think the real issue is that white people need to grapple with their own racism. White communities need to understand that racism, as Juno said, isn't about calling people bad words necessarily. It's about thinking those things too. It's about, the fact that if you think those things, and that goes into your unconscious bias, which means that if you're in a position of power, such as the police, means that you're more likely to kill somebody. These things all filter into us being marginalized, us being unsafe, us being impacted physically and mentally by white supremacy. So yeah, I think that yes, we need to, close the gap between the fact that we've been divided by white supremacy, but also white people are the majority. We're still the minority even when we're together. So white people need to confront and tackle and dismantle their own racism. So it should be white people out on the streets, protesting. It should be white people being put into the positions where Black people would be killed, because white people won't be killed. We saw this week a white 17-year-old shoot down 2 people and injure another, and then walk straight past police and get out of the state and be offered water by the police and be be detained without a scratch, even though he illegally owned a semi-automatic weapon. It's unfathomable. And then Jacob Blake got killed because the officer thought that he had a weapon, so he didn't even have a weapon in his hands. It was just assumed that he had a weapon, so he was shot 7 times in the back at point blank range. Those are 2 stories that happened in the same state and within the same week. So you really need to understand that it isn't just about what you do, it's about what you don't do. And the fact is that white people aren't doing anything. A lot of white people aren't doing anything. And it's that is stopping the real change from happening. Because if those white people that are well-meaning but aren't doing anything actually did something, then we would be a lot stronger as a community.
So just to look at those that are doing something, and
which unfortunately is the minority.
It is the minority, and I think that even within that minority we have challenges, because we are then facing saviorism under the guise of allyship. And I think there's a general myopia around the difference of those 2 things. So I wanted to ask you all, I guess, what you feel the difference is between allyship and saviorism.
Allyship is walking the walk and saviorism is talking the talk. I feel like, there needs to be a balance of talking so that other people can, so that you're leading by example, so people can see leadership. But if you're only talking and you're leading from a place of guilt rather than action, I think that allyship is thankless. Allyship is the right thing that you should be doing. It's the bare minimum. I think that allyship is you're meant to be anti-racist. It's not something that you should be applauded for. It's the very bare minimum of what you can do for Black lives is be anti-racist. But unfortunately, we're still in a point in time where a white person being anti-racist is applauded in a way that a Black person being anti-racist is not. So I think that white people need to understand that, being woke isn't a thing. It's all about human rights. It's about doing the right thing. It's about being a good citizen. And I think that that's what it comes down to. It comes down to recognizing each other's humanity and celebrating difference, not celebrating just the fact that we're the same. I think we hear a lot about people saying that we're all the same, really, and we're not. We're all massively different, and I think that that's a great thing. I think that if we're only focusing on what makes us the same, then we're sweeping under the carpet of what makes us different. And I think that we need to be celebrating that difference. We need to be embracing that and learning from each other. And then we'll realize that, the way that we think about gender in the West is a Western way of thinking, because we're aware of how people think about gender in the East. So we're aware that it's a very varied subject. So we're not saying there's only 2 genders, because that's a white supremacist way of enforcing an ideology onto someone's identity.
Yeah. So it's challenging our own perspectives, and I think Ben, I'd be really interested to hear what you feel is the difference between allyship and saviorism.
I think it's like what Munroe said, to be honest. But I think what's very evident to me is that because we are already a minority as LGBT people, I've seen a lot of people think that they've almost done enough, that is enough. Like, just by being a minority, surely, like, you know that I'm down with the team. You know I'm woke. Like, I've kind of done my bit. And in reality, just couldn't be further from the truth. Social media, the reason I took a month break was because just before, at the end of July, I was doing some reports around suicide. And things don't usually hit me close to home, but that one really, really hurt, because if I look at the young people that I was growing up with, I didn't really have any gay friends growing up that were immediately with me, but I did ride into them. So I had like 3 Black gay friends around the UK, all in very different circumstances, very different walks of life. But in January of this year, I lost the 3rd of those Black gay friends to suicide. And when I was doing this report about suicide, it kind of made me reflect. Basically, the investigation found that the government isn't recording data on LGBT suicides. But from speaking to all of these different LGBT organizations, they were telling me that, yeah, we've heard about people ending their lives during lockdown. But what was actually coming out that data couldn't show, because the data doesn't exist, was that a lot of people were people of color. So people of color were actually being affected during lockdown more than white people were, that were also LGBT. But for some reason, whether it's they were living at home and they were struggling with that, or they were living with friends and struggling with that, or they were homeless and struggling with that, they were ending their lives in the same way that my closest gay friends growing up had too. And it's stuff like that when I look, I'm like, wow, race really runs deep. So yeah, we can talk, like Munroe said, we can talk about how we're all the same, and it's like, oh, underneath our skin, we're all red. But actually, the reality shows that there are real systematic differences in the way that we are living and the way that we are treated. And I suppose my message coming back after this month off, where I've been in the Alps and I've been in forests and I've been camping, I feel refreshed, is actually just to be aware of your impact on the world. Because even if I was scrolling through social media in July, so a month after like everything really kicked off around Black Lives Matter, but just looking at the statistics that people were putting up just on their timelines to remind like some of their friends about the things that Black people were going through. But some of the things were like, oh, a number of Black men don't finish university in the same way that white men do. So I don't know, 50% of Black men drop out of university, whatever the statistic was. There were all these things. I was scrolling through social media and I was like, wow, this is really triggering. This is really traumatic. I was being reminded that as a Black man, through people trying to do their best, that I am a worse individual. I'm expected to fail. I'm expected to not get a job, or I'm expected to fail at university and finishing university. There was so much trauma that I was seeing. And I mean, I've got an accepting family, I've got a loving partner, I've got a dog, I've got things are pretty much sorted. But still for me, it got to the point when I was like, I need to take a break from this. So yeah, there is a lot more that needs to be done. A lot of people are being very performative via social media, but I think people just need to reflect on what they actually want their impact to be on the world. If you want to be a good person, be a good person. You don't need to flash it and show it off. Just be a good person. Like, it really isn't that difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you for sharing that. I think, yeah, you hit a lot of home truths there that I think a lot of us can resonate as being part of the LGBT plus community, and often the load that we bear. And I think that, you know, when we're looking at being allies for other people in the LGBT plus space, or people that are racially categorized differently, for want of a different way of putting it, you know, when we start to look at saviorism, you know, I feel that there are crucial differences, and I'm interested to know your thoughts on that as well, Juno.
I think obviously, like a lot of people, you know, I just want to be the very best ally that I can be. And it's funny because a lot of people come to me and say, how can I be a better trans ally? But at the same time, I'm working on trying to be a better ally to people of colour as well. I think it does start with work. And I think all white people, we do have to do some work. We've got to school ourselves. And that can be, like Munroe said, diversify your social media. I think that's the absolute least you can do. Like, it's free. You just click the follow button. But, you know, there's a myriad of amazing great writers out there. Start with Renier Lodge's book. Renier Lodge's book, Why No Longer Talking to White People About Race. It's incredibly accessible. I think it's about understanding that we've been taught wrong. The history we've been told is a lie. It is based on white supremacy and colonialism. And if you grew up in this country, you have been told a very, very skewed remix of how we came to be where we are now. And if you're a white person in the United Kingdom, you have benefited from the system. White supremacy benefits white people. Now, I think by trying to make society fairer, I don't think anybody's trying to take anything away from white people. And I think that's a big barrier for a lot of people when they come to this conversation, which is this sense that white people are going to lose something from society being fairer. And of course, that's not true. It's just about affording the rights and comforts that I have with everyone. And I also think as well, a lot of these issues are actively supported by the very richest, most powerful people in the country, which is our largely white politicians, those white media bosses who would love for working class white people to think that people of colour are the root of their oppression, when of course the root of their oppression is these billionaires at the top who have no right and no place in being as rich and powerful as they are. So I think really it's about our work, that we've got to take on that work. It really does start with us. And the best day to start was yesterday. But if you didn't start yesterday, start now. And I think that's something that we're at a real issue within society as well, which is these social media platforms, you know, they claim that they wanted to bring the world together, and all they've done is cause these divisions. And nobody wants to back down. Nobody wants to say they were wrong. But I think it's never too late to say, actually, I need to rethink this. And because at the moment we've got some people who are really, really entrenched in this them and us, or these culture wars, or divides, or debates. And actually, no. We've got to stop that, and we really do have to start to reschool ourselves and relearn these narratives that we've been told, because, you know, a lot of them are wrong. And I've had to do some work, and that's, you know, and it shouldn't be performed on social media. Those black squares weren't really helping anyone. In fact, they were actively spoiling the conversation on Instagram. So I think it's not sexy work, it's not glamorous work, it's not work you're going to get paid for, but I think it's work that we need to do, because it's, you know, the mainstream media at the moment isn't going to do that education for you. So it's a personal responsibility to white people to learn about white supremacy and how we can dismantle it. Sorry, I don't even know if that even vaguely answered your question, but
yeah, I think that's brilliant. What you all said is brilliant, and I think, you know, from my perspective, I have had to address the anti-blackness that I grew up with as an Indian person in my community, in my culture, in my family, as well as the homophobia, as well as the transphobia, as well as everything else, and even the misogyny, and look at what it is that I'm carrying, that I've been raised with. We were all born into a world that is white supremacist, anti-black, and misogynistic. Every single person on this planet was born into that world. We all carry that. And so there's a system of unlearning that is our own labor individually. How do I become a better ally for my black siblings? Well, for me, that's about doing the reading, doing the work, and not putting the label on them. But also for me personally, the difference that I observe as a person of colour, the difference between allyship and saviorism for me is who are you centering? If you are centering the person that is othered, then, and you are working out how you're taking on the labour to stand beside them and support them and hold them, then you're being an ally. if you are centering yourself in that narrative and going, oh, look at me, while I hashtag Black Lives Matter and put up a square that is going to fuck shit up, for want of a better expression, and has had no thought put into it, you're centering yourself, because you're saying, look at me, I'm not racist. Look at me, I'm being an ally. No, you're not. It's very misguided. And I see saviorism all the time in spaces where particularly white people, not always white people, want to center themselves in that narrative as the hero, right? Oxfam culture, let's call it, right? And I think that is the fundamental issue. And nobody has an excuse anymore, because it's not about you. It's not about me. It's about the people that are the most marginalized, and how we do the learning and develop the tools to be able to support them. I don't know if anyone else would say anything else before we move on to.
I think there's also something around not expecting those marginalized people to thank you as well for the work that you're doing. One of the most humbling things that I get is when someone who isn't out, even on social media, even to their friends or family or anything like that, engages with my work and will message me and say, like, I can't retweet this, I can't like this, but just so you know, I have seen this and this has really hit me, and thank you for doing it. And it's stuff like that that ultimately wouldn't really work on a corporate level, because even with Manchester Pride, I'm sure they have corporate responsibility targets that they're trying to meet in organizing certain things and putting things on, and most organizations will. But the reality is that just because those certain individuals within that community that you may be putting something on for can't actively click and engage in the metrics that you're currently trying to deliver on, it doesn't mean they're not there. So I suppose it's flagging that those communities are there and they're worth putting content on for and delivering content for, but they may not thank you for that.
Anything else from anyone before we move on? This is a sort of related point that we've touched upon, but I think it's important enough to bring forward and see if there's a different perspective that we can find on this, or move it forward a bit more. So we know that the labour falls on us, you know, or on the communities that are the most marginalised are expected to be the ones to go out and be that voice or educate that person, whether that's on a one-to-one basis or a larger, in a much larger way. I think that how do we, obviously we're going to continue to do this work because we do, but I think how do allies support us? Like, how do they take on that labour? How do they push forward to make that change? And it's something we've kind of covered, but I feel like, is there anything else that we're missing? You know, do the reading, follow people on social media that you may not otherwise follow, talk to your friends, call out racism around the dinner table with your family that you're living with because you're on lockdown together. You know, we have a great opportunity to create change here. What else can we do to create a shift in that balance, to take that weight off our shoulders?
I think we need to leave ladders down, for one thing. I think there is now within the community, there are some very powerful people, some really powerful lesbians, some really powerful gay men. Make sure you're creating opportunities. Like Ben said, you know, when you are putting a project together, who are you inviting to work with you on this? Because while we are getting into those positions of power, we need those people who are already in the positions of power to leave the doors open and leave the ladders down. Don't pull up those ladders behind you. There's a special place in hell, particularly for women, who pull up ladders for other women. We're allowed more than one woman on a team. Just there.
And isn't that a really fundamentally interesting byproduct of marginalisation? I think as diaspora we particularly feel as well, is that we're made to feel that. So I'll give you an example that I know, which is the latest UK census said that British Asians were 7% of the population. The census people that I think said we were about 11%. We breed like rabbits. There's no way that we're a smaller part of the population now. What I will say is that a lot of our community don't speak English, and we sure don't fill out census forms. So we're already underrepresented in the single most important piece of data around demographics in this country. When you look at workplaces, we're massively underrepresented in workplaces outside of the NHS, right? So it creates this kind of scenario of what me and my friends refer to sometimes as crabs in a bucket. You know, nobody wants to help. As soon as a crab's about to get out the bucket, they get pulled down, you know. When a crab gets to the top, it doesn't pull you up. And so I really love that reference of throwing down the ladders, because we're already marginalized for whatever that may be. We're made to feel as though there isn't space for us. And so there's a strange competitive element that happens, which is very counter to being a community builder, right? Which is what you're talking about. And I think that's so powerful. I don't know if any of you have experiences of that you want to share.
Yeah, I think it's gotten a lot better within the Black community, especially since we're having these conversations. I think that the Black Lives Matter movement is going to change a lot of things, if not within the white community, definitely within the Black community. Even insofar as how we, have been, some of us within the Black community have been scared to speak about racism through fear of being chastised. I think that it's definitely, I obviously some Black people didn't, but I think that the vast majority of people, especially people within the public, consciousness, definitely spoke up. And I think that, it provided an opportunity for us to, really throw down the gauntlet and be like, look, we're tired of this. And I hope that will, I hope that will impact on our community in a way where we pull each other up and we, act in a more unified way, because I feel like that was real unity. I think that our voice really was loud in that moment. And I say moment because, social media dies down, it goes in trends. It's just the nature of social media. But I think that, that we need to take a lesson from that and remember how strong and how loud our voice was when we all spoke up in that moment.
Brilliant. Anyone else want to contribute anything to that? Okay, so I will. Ben, did you want to say something?
Oh, to be honest, I was just going to say that for me, when I jumped in as a journalist and I realized how, if we're not going to talk about race, then it's class is a huge thing within journalism, especially. And I very quickly realized that as a poor boy from East London, there weren't people that sounded like me in a lot of newsrooms that I was trying to get freelance work in. But that's why I started up my Confidence Academy. And it's something I keep away from social media because, the internet is just very toxic. But actually just going around and speaking to young people around the country and just giving them a boost of confidence, being like, you can do this, like you can. It has given me so much personally in terms of almost being able to shut off social media and being like, it doesn't matter, because I'm actually seeing like the real life impact of my words and what's happening a year on from when I spoke to a young person, and now they didn't think they could go to university because they didn't think that people with their kind of financial backing could go to university, but actually they can and they've got a place. It's stuff like that, like I said, what do you want your impact on this world to be? What is it? And if you're not putting down the ladder, that's cute for you. Do what you need to do, that's fine. But then you can't be calling yourself a great person that's uplifting a community, because you're not. Like a retweet, I don't know, who's that helping? Like, for me, it's really about getting out and actively helping if you want to do that.
Brilliant. I think that's bang on. I couldn't agree more. And I think I love the sound of this Confidence Academy. And I think I can't speak for us all, but I was certainly lacking in mentors or people that looked like me during my journey, and started to use my name and face publicly, reluctantly, because nobody else, I couldn't see anyone like me. And so After 20 years of being out, I got fed up of that, and not wanting other people to go through that same experience. And I feel like we all share that, knowing and observing your work. And I guess that sort of rounds us off to the final question before we go on to questions from the audience. And I think it just really nicely leads on to what you've already been saying, Ben. But it's really about the need for visibility and the power of representation at Pride. And I guess we're talking about Pride as a microcosm of the queer community, which is a microcosm of the wider world. So as we are in a Pride conversation right now, I'd love to hear your sort of closing thoughts on, I guess, how meaningful that would be, possibly for you to have seen when you were earlier in your journey, or how you may feel that helps other younger people who are extremely vulnerable. Each of you on that. What do you feel is the power of the adequate representation at Pride?
I think it's everything, you know. Until I realized that it was a Black trans woman that kicked off the gay liberation movement, which led to Pride, I was under the impression that, you know, the T didn't really matter, that, you know, I hadn't transitioned at this point. I knew that I wanted to transition, but, you know, it's difficult. If you can't see the contributions of your community, then you just assume that there are none. And that's why it's so important that, you know, we teach, as Juno was talking about, you know, that we teach accurately, that we identify the contributions of all people within this country, that we're seeing all people within this country reflected in a not just an equal way, but with equity, you know. If it's equal, then we're still going to be the minority, but we need to change things. So people need to be exposed to things that they weren't necessarily be exposed to in real life. So I do think that visibility is a huge thing. It doesn't keep us safe. So we need, you know, the legislation to back that up. We need we need government to be on our side. Government's not on our side, but the media is getting better. The arts is getting better. But we need legislation to follow suit. You know, we need the people in charge of the country to be behind us. And I think that that's really why things are the way that they are, is that our leadership isn't there for us. So yeah, I can't remember what the question was. Been up so long. But I think that really for things to change, we need to understand that visibility and representation is just a very small part of what we need. We need our leadership to lead for us, not lead against us. And at the moment, they're leading against us.
Ben?
Yeah, growing up, I definitely didn't see any Black gay men. I was confused. I didn't realize that you could actually be Black and gay. Who knew? Who knew? In my all-boys school, I was like, wow, like this is definitely happening to me. Like I've got these feelings, but surely this can't be a thing. Like what? And looking back, it almost sounds ridiculous, but just I genuinely didn't know that I could exist. To the point that living as a bisexual, I question now whether or not that's because I'm actually bisexual, or is that because I genuinely thought that I could not be gay for so long that my mind almost tricked me into believing that I had to be with women, and that's why I got my attraction to women. It's just like it's so weird looking back now. Like representation meant so much to me that it genuinely, like, it could have changed my identity. It could have made my journey so much easier. If I look at my friends who are sadly no longer with us, like I know for a fact that had there been more representation for them, like it wouldn't have led to the end that it did for them in their lives. And I suppose that's why I now choose to use my social media in the way that I do, because whilst I'm still working for the BBC and have to be impartial on certain topics and not speak out about certain things, I know that not necessarily through my work, but just through me just showing that you can be a Black gay man and happy, that you can actually have someone that loves you and you can have a family that accepts you, it's possible. And I know that for people who may not be able to click retweet or click like, that is the representation that they need, because it's not coming from anywhere else. And I also question as well, like, the impact of stories and like acting, and I don't know, that there's something for me in that I never felt like fully represented by things that I knew were fake, like dramas on TV. It's like, okay, great, like a gay person a gay character kiss another gay character, like, great. To me, that wasn't enough. Like, what I was looking for was like real. I wanted to make sure that that person who was presenting as a gay man, who what I felt like, I wanted to know, like, how are you doing? Like, how are you living your life? How is this possible for you? And the first time I found that was with Derek from Big Brother. And Derek was this ultra conservative, fox hunting Black gay man. But he was the only Black gay man that I could see that wasn't pretending, wasn't acting, wasn't being a character. He was just himself. And he had absolutely no similarity with me apart from his race and his sexuality. But to me, that was enough. He suddenly became like, my God, he was my hero. And like I said, looking back, that's hilarious to me now, because I'm like, how was this bad? How is that my everything? What? But I would stay up and I'd watch like the 24-hour streams of my brother just to see how he was interacting with people and being with people, because I was like, wow, this is my only chance to literally see someone like me. So yeah, to anyone that's watching, I would say, be that representation. Share your story. The BBC is there for you to share your story. You have a very big platform, millions and millions of people. Share it. I'm literally here, ready and willing to listen to your experiences and to platform them, but you need to share them. I hate that a lot of my work is focused on trauma. I really don't like that, because yes, there's awful things happening to the LGBT community, but there are also some wonderful things as well. So allow yourself to be that representative that's like, yeah, I am living my best life. It hasn't got to be based on hate crimes. It can actually be that I'm winning at something. Be that representation.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, all of you. I have to move on to questions now, just because of time, but Juno, please feel free to pick this up and share anything about the last point as well. This next question is related to something that you said earlier, and I'll read it as it's written. Do you not think white people have to be prepared to lose power? To pick up on Juno earlier, we're not trying to take anything away from white people. I'm not sure a utopia exists where there isn't at least a power shift for the problem of privilege to be addressed and for everyone to have a seat at the table. So is that question clear?
I think I would agree. We're definitely not there yet, but I think we have to work towards it. If it's Field of Dreams, if we can imagine a world that is better and fairer, then hopefully we can commit to working towards that. But no, I mean, as long as there has been society, there has been inequality. But I want to try and dismantle white supremacy. I assume lots of other white people do, and maybe I am idealistic or naive, but I'd rather be idealistic and naive than uphold white supremacy, I guess.
I think white people do lose out insofar as that they're not going to be the top pick, and that the playing field is going to be level, which means that they're not at the top. So I think that in that way, yes, white people lose out, but that's not the way that things should be anyway. And it's not the way.
I don't see that as losing.
Yeah, it's not. It's technically losing. It's technically losing because it's like you're not going to be getting by on your privilege, but it's not really losing because it's not the way that things should be anyway, and it's an oppressive construct. So it depends on how you look at it. I don't see it as losing anything. I see it as equality and fairness. It's like, say, you know, changing the narrative of the boys' club in you know, male-dominated industries, and getting a much more of a diverse workforce. You don't lose out because really that workforce benefits. But if you want a boys' club and if you want a misogynistic environment, then of course you lose out because you don't have that anymore. So it really depends on how you're coming at it, I think.
And as well, when we look at those people who are in power of our country, where we're really looking at the boys' club in action, we're looking at incompetence.
Mm-hmm.
What this might mean is that a lot of incompetent people might lose out on some power. But I think that will benefit society as a whole, because we need less incompetence and more expertise, however that looks and however that sounds.
Fundamentally, it would benefit everybody, right? Everybody is set to benefit from a more representative and equal and fair society that has parity for people of all backgrounds and differences. So we've got one final question before we wrap up from the audience, and it is, what do you see as the main barriers to changing unconscious bias in the wider community? Ben, I don't know if you want to take that.
I was just exhaling because, wow, I don't even think I'm qualified to answer that. I'm pass.
Okay, no worries, let you do that.
I think, you know, confront just sit with, you know, and be honest with yourself, and, you know, just, you know, I think it's a powerful moment, understanding that, you know, some of the ways that you may think, not necessarily you or anybody here, but like all of us may think, is impacted by racism. You know, even Black people have anti-Blackness within us, because we've been raised under white supremacy too. So some of the ways that we may think about ourselves may have racism within that. So I think it's a powerful moment that you stop saying, I'm not racist, and start thinking, actually, yes, some of my mindset has been impacted by white supremacy, and some of my thinking is racist, because we live in a racist country that's been built on racism. So I think it's just about being honest. I think that's really it. It's about being honest.
And all I would add to that is mindfulness. I mean, when, you know, like a lot of damaged queer people, I see my therapist, and because I'm in a privileged position where I can pay one, I think we need more therapists on the NHS, but that's a whole other conversation. But about, you know, when I was trying to deal with my anxiety, my therapist encouraged me to spend time with the beliefs that were in my head, you know, sit them down and interrogate them and ask where those anxieties are coming from. And I think we need to do the same with our preconceived ideas around race and about gender and around sexuality. We need to hold those things in our head and say, hang on, where have I learned that? Where have I heard that? Why do I think that? Is that racism? Is that white supremacy? You know, where have these thoughts come from? And that's okay. I think it's okay for us, you know, no one alive chose to be born into our society the way it is, but we were, and now it's our responsibility to challenge the structures that we were born into, and that's fine. I think that's something that, like Munroe said, that we all have to do regardless of our background.
Yes, massively. I think that's a really a good place to end the discussion on, in terms of there is individual work for us all to do in terms of our care for ourselves, but also how we can be better support and allies for people experiencing other levels of marginalization, and looking at how we can find the tools ourselves using social media, following people like everybody on this panel and the people that we follow, and looking at the content that they're creating and what they're talking about and the books that they're writing, and educating ourselves and sharing that with our people, whether that's around a dinner table or whether that's with friends or a broader community. And that's how we start to create grassroots change and start to build community more widely. And I just want to thank you all for a really beautiful panel with so much really interesting perspective, and for all of you sharing your personal experiences and stories. I know that the work that goes into that, so thank you so much from me, the Manchester Pride team, and everybody that's been watching and listening. Thank you to you. I know there have been some great conversations going on in the chat room. So thank you to Manchester Pride, everyone. Make sure you check out other stuff that's going on in the programming. There's tweet about stuff, put stuff out on websites and social channels wherever you can. This is going to be available afterwards to rewatch, which will be shared as well. Coming up in the programming, tomorrow there's going to be a closing event, which is an annual candlelit vigil, which is going to be 9 p.m. on United We Stream. So yeah, keep checking out follow-up resources. Thank you to everyone that's been here. Thank you. Oh, bless you.
Been amazing.
Thank you to Russell, our beautiful interpreter, for doing a fantastic job of everything that we've been saying and making that accessible for the broader members in our community. Much love to you all. Peace and blessings, and hope to see you all again soon. Much love.
See you later.
Bye.